How often have you lived in illusion? I'll share 3 quick ones with me because I think you could probably identify with some of them. The first one was I was a senior in high school. I had been accepted to the school of my choice to become a nurse in Omaha, Nebraska, going from a little rural town 100 miles away to the big city. I was so excited to be going to a school where I would be with so many girls. And also in the school, in the basement, there was a 2-lane bowling alley that was free to play and also a swimming pool. And also I just thought, well, I would coast along through nurses training just like I coasted along through high school. Well, that was the illusion. The reality was that when I actually got there, until I finally started dating Karen and stuff, those girls seemed more like sisters to me, and I was a brother to them. Also, I wasn't going to be skating any place if I was going to avoid flunking out of school. So even though I was in a big city for the first time and also had a free bowling alley in the basement and a swimming pool, I never got to see them because it took all my time to study, so I didn't flunk out. Another time was, my parents had a very strong marriage, and so once I fell in love with Karen and we got married our senior year of nurses training, then I just thought it was on automatic pilot, It seemed like my parents did, and so I thought the same thing would be happening to me, only to find out that, there's a lot of work to stay married, and there's a lot of communication, a lot of compromise, a lot of forgiveness. And so the illusion was that it was automatic. The reality was it's a lot of work. And then the final thing is having children. Karen and I spent 5 years going through infertility issues, and then we finally she was pregnant with the first child, and we thought, wow, it's going to be that cute little picture that you always see on the boards and stuff. Well, they're work, and a lot of work, and you always worry about them. And so that's the reality. The illusion was something totally different. Well, that's exactly what the gospel is about today. The gospel was about the illusion that the apostles and Jesus' disciples had about being a follower of Christ. Because after all, who recruited them in the first place? They didn't go out looking for Jesus. Jesus recruited them. And how excited they were to be a part of it. I mean, after all, Jesus said he was the Son of God. He was the Messiah. They were expecting Jesus or somebody like Jesus, and they were certainly hoping it was Jesus. And why should they not believe that it was Jesus? I mean, here's a person who can calm storms. Here is a person who can feed multiple people with a couple loaves and fish. This is a person who could heal people. This is a person who could raise people from the dead. This is a person who could get out of tight situations whenever he was in it. And so kind of the crowning part of this whole thing was when they went into Jerusalem on that Sunday before the Passover, and the people were waving their palms and tree branches and everything else. This is what the apostles and the disciples signed up to be. This is what they saw to be followers of Christ. And so that was the illusion. The reality came later in that week, when Jesus had foretold 3 times that this was going to happen, but how could they have possibly believed that it was indeed going to happen? This person who was so charismatic, who had power over everything, and yet on that Thursday night, he's picked up by temple guards, he's found guilty, he's flogged, he's brought before a bunch of people, Pilate included, and he's condemned to death. And this was after all of them had vowed that they would stay with him even if it meant their death. And so although we don't hear exactly what has happened to any of the apostles and the disciples while Jesus was being crucified, you certainly understand that this was a big show out there. And this was something that they weren't surprised, they were totally surprised by. And so someplace in that crowd, those apostles and disciples were witnessing Jesus dying on the cross. And this was such a terrible death. He died between 2 criminals. It was like he was a criminal. That's how he was treated. And that's what they went to bed on that Friday night, that Sabbath night. And then comes Sunday morning, and we heard it 2 weeks ago on Easter, where we heard where Mary Magdalene came to anoint the body and finds that the tomb is empty. And she goes and she tells the apostles, because they're still up in that upper room. After all, they came from Galilee, which is about 80 or 90 miles to the north, and they came down for Passover. So they probably were planning on staying there for some time, perhaps a week or so. And they were in that room, and Peter and the other disciple go and they see that there's an empty tomb there. But what's the first thing they think about? It certainly isn't that Jesus was risen from the dead. I mean, there were very serious people who did not like Jesus, and that's why he was killed. And so it would be much more likely that they came and took his body for some reason. Or we also have heard in other places where there were other disciples of Jesus who were healing in Jesus' name. And Jesus' apostles had said, Jesus, do you want us to go and stop them? And Jesus said, no, if they're doing it in my name, then it's good. Let them go. So there may have been some other people that were around that wanted to protect Jesus' body somehow, and they came and took the body. The last thing they were really thinking about is that Jesus was raised from the dead. Well, they continued in that upper room through that Sunday. And then, not all the people were from Galilee. There were 2 of them in the verses that come right before our gospel that came from Emmaus, which was only probably 15 miles away from Jerusalem. So, their whole world fell apart, essentially. And so they said, well, why stay around here? We'll start walking back home so we get there before dark. And that's when Jesus joins them. But they don't recognize Jesus because he's not just a resuscitated Jesus body. He's changed some. And so they don't recognize him until they invite him to spend the meal with them, and he blesses and breaks the bread, and then they understand that it's Jesus. Well, I don't know how far they got on the road to Emmaus, but I bet it took them a lot less time to get back to Jerusalem, to that upper room, to let the apostles and the disciples up there, let them know what exactly they happened. And if 2 of your friends came and said that to you, would you believe them? And if you did believe them, what would you think? Would you really be ashamed of your actions from Thursday night after what you did? Would you really be excited that Jesus is back? Well, if he was, what's he going to say to you? You're so lucky that I'm not Jesus. Because if you did that to me, I would wait for you to come to apologize to me. But that's not what Jesus does. Jesus goes to them. And he doesn't go and he doesn't berate them. But what he says is, peace be with you. I mean, isn't that shocking? The forgiveness, the love that he's showing at that moment to people who so disappointed him, so betrayed him. And of course, Jesus knows what's going through their mind. I would know what was going through the mind. If I was resurrected and came up here, you would think I was a ghost. And so he shows them his hands and his feet. Again, he's not like a resuscitated corpse of what Jesus looked like before he died on the cross. There is something different about him. He is resurrected, but he still has the scars from his crucifixion. And then he also asks them for food to eat so that they can see. A ghost certainly couldn't pick up food. A ghost can put it in the mouth and have it disappear, essentially. And so it's not just an apparition. It is Jesus. And so Jesus is there, and he's sharing a meal. And so one of the things that all of this stuff encompasses for us is that when we are dealing with Jesus and the fact that he's resurrected, we have great hope. When we look at the time that he sat down, he broke the bread with the 2 people going to Emmaus, and then again he asked for food, You get signs of sacrament of Eucharist. Also, the fact that he came and he didn't berate them, he accepted them. He came to them, he didn't wait for them to come to him. Forgiveness. And also, he opened their minds to understand the scriptures. So he's brought the Spirit in on them. And finally, when you put all those things together, what it equals is the love that Jesus has for us. The love that Jesus had for them. You know, they did so many things that we would consider unforgivable. And yet Jesus forgives them. They didn't have to even ask for it. The same is true for us. We certainly do acts that we are not proud of, that we need forgiveness of. Jesus, through his love, forgives us. Jesus will love us unconditionally. But what's Jesus asking of us in return? We find that in the very last sentence of this particular gospel. You are witnesses to these things. Now, you've heard a number of times the thing, missionary disciples. It's something that, unfortunately, we decided to bring that together during the pandemic when a lot of you guys weren't even here, and so we have a lot of education to do about that. But what it doesn't mean is it doesn't mean that you need to stand on street corners and preach. But what it does mean is that if you really believe Jesus' love, Jesus' hope, Jesus' forgiveness, Jesus' Spirit, and the Eucharist, that we receive grace to have all this stuff happen to us, then we should be living our lives differently than those people who don't believe. And that's what a missionary disciple is. A missionary disciple is simply someone who's living with hope because they know that Jesus rose from the dead. It's a promise that's to us. And that Jesus has unconditional love for us, so we should therefore have unconditional love for others. That Jesus forgives us, so we should be forgiving others. That's what makes us missionary disciples. Amen.